Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. Brian Regan, a non-Christian but generally very clean comedian, has one bit where he's talking about political ads, etc., which transitions into how candidates are described, such as so-and-so is a no-nonsense judge. He says it just once, he'd like to see a nonsense judge. A guy wearing a beanie with a propeller on top, sentencing people to the craziest punishments, etc. It's a good bit. Brian's a funny man. His brother Dennis, nearly as funny, just as clean. Anyway, the same can be said about most things. There's potentially a no-nonsense side and a nonsense side. Words are no different. Unfortunately, the same words are used for both sides. It's the user who determines if the meaning of the combined words are sensical or not. For fun, I'll let you decide which words you hear today are nonsense and which ones aren't. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. On today's episode, first we're going to make it up as we go along. Then we'll talk about some solid baby names. And finally, we'll see if you believe a word I say. So, forget everything you thought you knew about what things mean. Go grab a pad of pencil and a paper. You'll want to take notes. And finally, prepare to be completely and totally amazed. Or prepare for complete and utter disappointment. Your call. And now, 3 no-nonsense words of absolute sincerity. Here we go. So I've been tracking my personal stats from doing this podcast, you guessed it, on an Excel spreadsheet. In 183 episodes, plus my intro episode, over nearly 3 years, I've spoken for almost 190.5 hours at an average pace, words per minute pace of 156, which incidentally at one point I looked up speaking pace. Slow speech is less than 110 words per minute. Conversation is typically between 120 to 160 words per minute, but could be up as high as 200 words per minute. Auctioneers speak between 250 and 400 words per minute. John Moshita Jr., not sure if I'm saying that name right, also known as Motormouth. You might know him from the Micro Machines or the FedEx commercials from that's gotta be 30 years ago now. Or he was the voice of Blur in the Transformers cartoon movie from about that long ago as well. And he did other things as well. His record was 586 words per minute, which was broken twice since he said it, with the current record being 655 words per minute by Sean Shannon. Now, people who read for audiobooks or speak on podcasts, such as this one, are asked to speak from 150 to 160 words per minute. And as I said, I'm at 156 words per minute, so right down the middle. But if you put me at 1.5 speed, I guess I'm at, 230 words per minute? And that's fine. That's just fine. Speaking of words, I've calculated that I've typed somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,550 Microsoft Word pages of text with a grand total of just over 1.78 million words typed and spoken so far. Okay, yes, some of it's copy and paste from one thing into the document, but you get the point, all right? It's a lot of words. And hopefully, in this amount of time, those words have meant something to you. Not all of them. Sure, I get that. Some segments worked better than others. Some segments worked more for some and not for others, and that's fine. I don't expect to knock it out of the park every time for everyone. My point in mentioning this is, well, first, it's just kind of amazing. You don't realize how all of this adds up as quickly as it does. I can't imagine all of these radio broadcasters and podcasters, et cetera, who are putting out this much content just day after day. Secondly, the words are important, right? The way things are phrased, the tone or the context of what's being said, the meaning of your words, the hidden meaning, it all matters. As we're all well into the election season here, and we're moving rapidly to election day, or week, or do we vote for a full quarter of the year now? I don't know. I've been kind of frustrated with words and how we're being forced to just accept certain meanings of words. This came to a head for me today when I came across this article. I was just going to write a snarky Facebook post about it, which is pretty much my custom, but I decided to use this as the springboard for this segment and what I'm going to be talking about here. So found on theblaze.com, headline, Will Ferrell says transphobia stems from ignorance. Why would you care if somebody's happy? Why is that threatening to you? No, I like Will Ferrell, I really do. And this is just another case of you never want to know the politics of your favorite and then fill in the blank. The exception, if you're a Christian and or conservative, is that you'll be pleasantly surprised. The norm is you get an article like this. So the article isn't really important. Just to give it its due, apparently Ferrell has made a Netflix documentary about him taking a road trip across the United States with a man who has transitioned to a woman. I don't know, sounds riveting to be sure. In an interview, Ferrell made some comments like this, quote, "If the trans community is a threat to you, I think it stems from not being confident or safe with yourself." Okay. Quote, "I think we fear what we don't know." And, quote, "There is hatred out there. It's very real and it's very unsafe for trans people in certain situations," he added, "but I don't know why trans people are meant to be threatening to me as a cis male." So first of all, nobody cares what you think about this subject. Well, it's kind of the problem is that we have too many people offering thoughts and opinions, not enough people willing to look at facts. Look, we'll come back to this in a few minutes. I wanted to go over some other words or phrases that you've heard or you've been hearing and what we're actually being expected to believe versus what's really meant. Now, please understand, I could go on for days with this thing. I mean, this is a small selection that we're going to get into. And also, since we're in that political season, I want you to think where you've heard some of these words or phrases. Have they come from, say, Commie Kamala or MAGA Trump? Have they come from the mainstream government-run media channels or the so-called conservative broadcasts? So let's start with the big one, shall we? Abortion. If you're against abortion, to any degree, you're given the label pro-life. Well, that's nice. Of course, that term is used in a way just to slam those who are simply stating that they don't want the unborn or the just born babies to be murdered. See, if you're pro-life, that must mean you're anti-death penalty too, or else you're just not serious about pro-life stances. Except that no, those are two completely different scenarios that should be discussed separately. But more to the point, the opposite of pro-life is anti-life, right? Or pro-death. That's what the other side must be, right? Nope. Somehow they're pro-choice. Well, that sounds nice too, right? I mean, everyone likes choice. None of us like to be forced to do something. So they're pro-choice, but what choice are they pro about? Well, the choice of who lives and who dies, specifically with regard to unborn and recently born babies. And although the pro-life position can be different with an innocent unborn life and a guilty, brutal criminal, the pro-choice position does not differentiate. See, the mother should choose if the baby lives or dies, not the baby, not the father in most cases. The judge or judges should decide if the convict lives or dies, not the victim or the victim's family. Ultimately, the government and the hospital administration should decide which patients should live or die, not the patient necessarily or the patient's family. And with regard to suicide, it should be left up to you with some helpful guidance to choose if you should live or die. Not laws, not your family, not a counselor or a psychiatrist, especially if they're going to suggest the incorrect choice. And although the opposite of pro-life apparently isn't pro-death, the opposite of pro-choice is in fact anti-choice. Because those of us who are pro-life are apparently just hateful people who are anti-choice, trying to inflict our choice where the mother should make the choice for the baby who would absolutely choose to live rather than be brutally slaughtered. I mean, I can say that with 100% confidence, but it goes beyond that even because now pro-choice isn't really even a thing anymore. No. Now it's women's health care. If you're pro-life, you're literally anti-health care for women. It has nothing to do with a mother wanting to murder her baby. Now it's about you or I wanting women to die or women to not get the health care they need. But is that what we're doing? Is there anyone who wants to see the end of abortion also wanting to stop women from getting annual checkups or pap smears or mammograms, blood tests, cancer treatments, or anything else that used to be considered healthcare? It's a ridiculous notion, but what we're being conditioned to is to associate abortion with very standard procedures and tests that are important and necessary for the normal maintenance of health. We'll come back to that definition in just a little bit. What you'll find is that a lot of these terms and phrases all kind of loop around on themselves and intertwine with others. Let's look at an old favorite, shall we? Climate change. Now, does the climate change, and is it changing now? Is the climate in the room with you? Well, the answer to all of those is yes. See, the climate is always changing. There may be periods of greater or lesser speed of change, rate of change, but it's always changing. But that's not what climate change means anymore. It's not a simple statement of, fact, universal fact. No. Climate change now means man-caused change in global temperatures that will kill us all. And it's meant that for a while, but we had to work through global cooling and in the next ice age. That was, 50 years ago. And then global warming. And then that kind of failed to some degree, although they're still pushing it. Now there's weather weirding, et cetera, et cetera. And then we finally settled on climate change as our go-to phrase in order to cause fear and panic in the lives of unthinking mental midgets like Greta Thunberg, and pretty much all celebrities and mainstream media talking heads, and the naive, fear-driven mouth breathers who walk among us and vote. Just FYI. And to try to drive that fear into us even more, we no longer have storms. We don't have, like a good strong rain, just a deluge of rain or anything like that, a soaking rain. No. Now we have rain bombs. We don't have a blizzard anymore. We have snowmageddon or snowpocalypse, right? And everything is because of climate change. If it's dry, it's climate change. Wet, climate change. Hot or cold, or the same as last year. That's climate change. A very busy hurricane season, or a season with almost no big storms, all climate change. And that's all because we drive cars and use fossil fuels for heating and power generation, and the CO2 level in the atmosphere has gone up by a few parts per million over, X number of years, apparently no different than it's done in the past, but this time it's man's fault. Well, to any normal, clear, logical thinking human, this is absolutely ridiculous. Climate change is real. All the rest is clearly bunk. And I guarantee that people like Al Gore, John Kerry, the Clintons, the Obamas, I'd say Biden, but he doesn't know if he's wearing pants on a day-to-day basis. The United Nations, the World Economic Forum, etc., they're all well aware that what they're saying about climate change, man-caused, global warming climate change, is bunk and lies. But using fear on a population of sheep generally leads to money and power and control, which they seem to really enjoy, and they're more than willing to destroy and murder whatever and whoever they need to in order to keep that power. Speaking of power, how about the term gun control? Now, gun control used to mean that you didn't pull a gun out until you were serious about using it. You knew what it was aimed at. Your finger wasn't on the trigger until you were ready to pull it, etc., etc. To normal, thinking, non-fear-based organisms, it still does mean that. But the term itself, once a positive term, is now a phrase that evokes negative emotion regardless of the side you're on. See, the term gun control now actually means lessen gun ownership rights or just take guns away. Whether that's limiting the types of gun you can own or the size of magazine or paperwork required to be filled out in order to own a gun, all the red tape you must deal with, places you're allowed to bring your gun. This is all gun control. And of course, on one side of the argument are those who apparently believe that the person is innocent and the gun is guilty. Those on the other side say that a gun is a tool. It's actually not the problem. It's people that we need to figure out. But we can't label people anymore. It's not a disabled person. It's a person with disabilities or a person who is differently abled. It's not a criminal or a murderer anymore. Now it's a person who commits a crime or a gun which does a murder while in contact with an innocent human. Probably. Gun control is simply the unconstitutional limiting of the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. But they can't say that they want to do something unconstitutional, so they shout, gun control, usually after some mentally and spiritually sick individual who is almost always a politically left-leaning individual, look into it, murders a bunch of kids using a gun. So what about the terms, say, fake news or disinformation? Both of those sound bad, but because of the way those terms have been spun, fake news has turned into kind of a joke, a whiny phrase said by crazy extremists, while disinformation is what those crazy extremist whiners are saying. The problem is that both of these are decrying the same problem, lies in the dissemination of information. I could tell you about a massive wreck on the interstate when no such accident occurred, and that would be both fake news and disinformation. Behind each of these terms is a claim that the actual truth is different from what's being stated. There is a movement to stomp out what they consider to be disinformation, while a dismissal of those claiming fake news. But since both of these are making a claim to the knowledge of truth as opposed to the information being given, it should be easy to dispel lies from the truth, which is what we should all want. But we don't. The concept of fake news and disinformation have taken on a status of opinion rather than fact. Fake news may be a bona fide, provable lie, or it may be that I don't like or agree with what's being said. Disinformation may be the propagation of lies, or it may be that I don't want that information to make its way into the public sphere for a variety of reasons. John Kerry, the aging, and from the looks of it, aging poorly, lurch-like, horse-faced, dishonorable liar, military traitor, and climate alarmist, for reasons of money, and probably also money, was recently on some panel for the World Economic Forum, an organization that should be completely obliterated in every way possible, and stated while speaking about the widespread use of social media, quote, "Part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue, it's really hard to govern today. The referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact have kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And, people go and people self-select where they go for their news, for their information, and then you get into a vicious cycle. So it's really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have some accountability on facts, etc. But look, if people only go to one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country that are prepared to implement change in other ways. He then says that he thinks democracies haven't proven that they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with all the challenges we're currently facing. Then he said that to him, that's what this election is about. See, what Lurch is saying is that he'd like to see a different governmental style in the U.S. that could eliminate what he considers to be disinformation. Well, remember what was called disinformation during the COVID so-called pandemic, which is really where this term gained prominence. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and various other drugs and regimens were just horse paste and witch doctor stuff. That stuff can't help with COVID, except that it's been proven over and over again that it could and it did. The vaccine, and we'll hit that one shortly, the vaccine was 99% effective at stopping infection and the spread. But if you didn't get it, you were going to kill all the people who did. But then it was 95% effective, then 90%. And eventually dropping well below 50% effective, probably. I don't know. Who cares? But those who said the vaccine wasn't going to help were spreading disinformation. Those who said it was killing people were and are spreading disinformation, even though the data, such as we're able to collect, absolutely verifies it's killing people and will continue to do so in many, many ways well into the future. Masks do nothing. That was disinformation, even though it was prior to COVID and was during COVID, proven scientifically that the only mask that could potentially stand a chance against the virus was an N95, but that's only if it was worn perfectly, which they never were because you can't make it more than about 15 minutes in a perfectly sealed, perfectly fitted N95 before you either pass out or you lose your mind. It was disinformation that the virus originated from a lab, which it absolutely did. And on it went through the election, through the controversy of hacked or faulty voting machines, late-night mystery boxes of ballots, stacks of ballots with the same handwriting, etc., etc. And time again, slowly but surely, what was called disinformation was actually found to simply be fact that was either not desirable by certain people to be allowed in the public sphere, or at worst was a plausible possibility that was opposite of the opinion and agenda of those in power. Disinformation is now a polarizing term. It means crazy, right-wing lies to about half the country, and it means inconvenient, agenda-destroying facts to the other half. Now, speaking of the word vaccine, whether you're truly an anti-vaxxer, and that even has to be defined now at this point. I mean, as you know, there are people who are anti-COVID vaccine and anti-mRNA vaccine people. There are those who are anti any new vaccine from COVID on into the future. Or you have the original anti-vaxxers who are anti any vaccine anytime from anywhere. So regardless of where you stand on the topic, the definition, I'll say in nearly all online dictionaries, was changed either right before or right after the COVID shot either came out or was announced in order to include genetically modifying technologies as a definition. This kind of gene therapy has been around for a while, specifically being researched as a way to stop or maybe cure cancer, but it was never called a vaccine until the COVID chemical injection. But if the powers that be came out and said that we could stop COVID, and all you need to do is take this brand new, never been tried on a mass scale, experimental gene therapy injection, I'd say that less than the, 70% of the global population, I'd say the less than them would have actually jumped on board for the shot and the booster, and booster, I think we're up to, something like that. So call it a vaccine, because we've all had vaccines, except for a few percent of people, the crazy people. No, vaccines are safe. They're effective with a long history of success, right? So the definition was changed into something more palpable. What was a lie? If you took the COVID vaccine, no, you didn't. You took a COVID genetic therapy drug designed to manipulate your very genetic makeup. Now, we could look at the way the term family has been distorted in marriage. I mean, those terms have been redefined by society to mean something they absolutely don't mean. I mean, I can call a puppy dog a battleship, but that doesn't make it true. Marriage is one man and one woman. That's all. Anything other than that can be a union of whatever you want to call it, but it's not marriage. Family can be defined a variety of ways, but it can't be defined in all ways. Masculinity is another one. We could look at the old definition of masculinity and compare it to the new definition of toxic masculinity, and I bet we'd find that those two definitions are remarkably similar. So what changed? Well, nothing. Nothing except for what society has deemed acceptable, and masculinity is no longer acceptable. Look at the act of sitting. Yes, just sitting. Women generally sit with legs together or crossed, top leg kind of flopped over the bottom leg. Men typically sit with legs apart to some degree, or legs crossed with ankle or calf of the top leg on top of the knee of the bottom leg. There's a very basic anatomical reason for this difference. But now men aren't sitting, they're man-spreading. We're asserting our toxic masculinity by spreading out and trying to make ourselves bigger than we are, displaying our, shall we say, endowment for all to see, or something like that. Or maybe, and I mean, I know this is crazy, maybe, smashing the boys hurts. Not to be too crass. But no, I'm wrong. It's toxic masculinity. Moving on, let's say, to Christian nationalism. What does that make you think of? If you're like most people today, your immediate thought is that it's something we absolutely cannot have in our public or private society. It's scary. It's dangerous. Isn't that what the Nazis did, or the Inquisition, of which the Spanish one nobody expected? If you know, that was funny. If you don't know what I'm saying, that was confusing. Doesn't matter. Or the Salem witch trials, etc., etc. Wasn't all that Christian nationalism? Well, so what is Christian nationalism? Well, the basic idea is that they believe the country was founded as a Christian nation. Therefore, it is a Christian nation and should today and on into the future be a Christian nation. This can go to the point that some supporters believe the United States government should declare it as a Christian nation and laws should reflect it being a Christian nation. That's not to say that Christian nationalists believe that the First Amendment, which guarantees the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, among others, should be eliminated, nor does it believe that this country should be ruled as a theocracy. Now, look, I'm sure that some believe the Constitution should be rewritten and this nation should be a theocracy, but there are some who believe pretty much anything. Don't worry about them. There are those who believe we are mandated as Christians to take control of all aspects of society, at which point Jesus will come back and rule the world. The New Apostolic Reformation types believe in this, which is called the Seven Mountain Mandate, the seven mountains being the seven divisions they've sliced up the aspects of society into. You can dismiss them too. They're wrong, biblically. But overall, is there anything wrong with believing this nation was founded as a Christian nation? No. I believe that in large part it was. The basic concept of the Constitution was taken from the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. All laws harken back to the concept of right or wrong, which comes directly from biblical creation. The laws are all, or at least used to be, all based on very basic principles of morality, which are based in the Bible, and the list goes on. So, should the government declare us to be a Christian nation? I mean, I don't know. I don't see a problem with that. As long as we're a nation that isn't a theocracy, as we'll screw that up like every time it's been tried in the past. But to say that this is our national language, and this is our flag, and this is our Constitution, and this is our nationally recognized religious belief system, I have no problem with that. And people can decide if they want to live here or visit here based on who we are and the freedom we guarantee. It's maybe not the norm, but the concept isn't completely crazy or foreign, to be honest. Today, there are a number of nations who have officially declared themselves Christian. Per Wikipedia, quote, these countries include Argentina, Armenia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Denmark, including Greenland, and the Faroes, England, Georgia, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Malta, Monaco, Norway, Samoa, Serbia, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vatican City, and Zambia. So, do we consider those nations to be like no-go zones if we're not Christians? Are they checking your papers, looking for your mark on your forehead by the Holy Spirit before you're allowed across the border? Are we protesting? Are they protesting because the rights of those who don't identify as Christians in these various nations are being trampled on? Furthermore, as long as a belief system isn't forced upon someone, what's wrong with, at the very least, Christian morals and ethics? Are they really that terrible and harmful? But, yes, apparently they are, as Christian nationalism has been turned into a slur, typically aimed at whitey, about how oppressive and dangerous it is. But that's simply not the case. It's only what we're told to believe. But part of the problem is that as Christians, we've done a poor job of defining ourselves or pushing back on those who are defining us. The term Christian is now kind of a nebulous term that really has no meaning, except for those who are truly born again, and we cringe every time we see someone claim Christianity who is very clearly not a Bible-believing born-again Christian. On to our last couple examples. And I've mentioned this one before. Admittedly, some of the others I've mentioned should be a larger pet peeve for me than this one, but this one just gets me every time. Range anxiety. Now look, this is unique to electric vehicles, or at least that's how it's used. This is the fear that you don't have enough charge left in your little batteries to make it to your destination. I had range anxiety a few Sundays ago as I was driving home from church. I thought I had enough gas to just pull into the house with probably 0 miles left on the tank in order to fill it up. Remember, I fill my cars up out of gas cans, which I fill up in order to use my full 35 gallons of discount fuel points from Kroger. But it soon became clear that this was not going to happen. I just was not going to make it. Now, luckily, I live in America. So I pulled over, put a few gallons in the tank, and finished driving home. The anxiety with regard to range for electric vehicles takes on a few additional aspects than that, though. First, if you're down to a few miles left on the battery, you can't just pull over at the next exit to fill up. At least, not at a dedicated charger, because those aren't just readily available off every exit. Now, for most people, they'll plug up at home overnight, and barring a massive, unquenchable fire in the garage, they'll have a full charge, or at least enough range in the morning to make it through their day. The problem comes in when you must go farther than your vehicle's range in a single day. See, the problem isn't so much range anxiety. The problem is range over time anxiety. Not so much how far can I go, it's how long will it take me to go the distance I need to go. For me, I can take a trip back to see family, regardless of who. It's just over 800 miles, and I can do that with my current vehicle, with some fluid intake management, with about one stop. I can do it in one stop, maybe 20 minutes long or so, to fill up the car, drain the bladder, get some food or snacks, back on the road. No range over time anxiety for me. In most electric vehicles, I would be stopping 2 to 3 times to charge a battery if I charged it all the way, which is generally not done on these kinds of trips. I mean, typically it's a rapid charge to about 80% of the range, not wanting to drain it past 10 or 15% before you stop to recharge yet again. So you never get the full use of your entire tank. You can't fill up the entire battery in any amount of time that even remotely resembles anything reasonable, and depending on the charging system you can find, if it's operable at all, you're talking a stop of what, an hour? Multiple hours for each stop to fill about 60% of your battery. This takes a 12-hour drive and turns it into what, 16, 18, maybe more hours? So as I see these articles that say XYZ is designed an EV that can now go 400 miles between charges, will that cure your range anxiety? Well, the answer is no, it just won't, as that's never been the problem. If an EV could go 250 miles and give me that full 250 miles with a 5 to 10 minute recharge, then we'd start addressing the so-called range anxiety, which I'll continue to argue should be called the range over time anxiety. As of now, they have no answer for that, so they just add larger battery capacity, which increases the full charge miles slightly, but also increases the time to get to that 80%, or if you're really feeling silly, the full charge. All right, with all of that, let's go back to our article quick. Will Ferrell doesn't understand why people would be transphobic about transgender people who are just trying to be happy. Well, let's start with the first term, transphobic. Or you could lump homophobic in there as well if you want. I would be labeled as a trans or a homophobe. I know that. I have absolutely no doubt about that. The problem is that the second half of those words, the phobia part, well, that implies fear. Except for these psychotic trannies that seem to be shooting up schools and other people, I'm not actually afraid of, nor have I ever been afraid of a gay or a trans person. Depending on how flamboyant they are, there are some of these trannies that are somewhat frightening in their appearance and actions, but I'm not afraid of them in any way implied by the term phobia. I have a much greater sense of arachnophobia or herpetophobia, the fear of spiders or snakes, respectively, and even that isn't a paralyzing fear for me. Now, I would argue that there is almost nobody who is phobic with regard to homo or trans people. It's a stupid term. It's a term that's been crafted and defined so as to make those of us who oppose the normalization of the LGBTQIA2+ agenda and culture, makes us appear to be backwards and fear-driven, low IQ hill people. The reality, however, is that we're not homophobic or transphobic. We're anti-LGBT agenda because we know what the agenda of those promoting this ideology is. It's one of perversion. It's one of destruction. It's ultimately one of death. So what about the term transgender? We've all been conditioned to just accept this term as well. And we're told that this term means someone who has changed their gender from one to the other. Now, we're also told that there are a million gender choices and gender doesn't matter unless you're transgender, in which case there are only apparently 2 genders and they've changed from one to the other, and it definitely matters. Ignoring that little hypocrisy, we're told a person is transgender if they say they're different from their sex assigned at birth. In fact, back to our women's health care, I told you we'd get back there, the Cleveland Clinic, this is a legitimate hospital. This is one of the most well-known in the nation, possibly the world. This is a major player in many ways in this country and the world. On their website, on a page defining what women's health care is, they say this.
Over time, we've come to learn that there are even more differences at play between the sex you're assigned at birth, your gender identity, and your sexual orientation. The intersection of all these things has a direct impact on your everyday health, and they all inform the type of care that you need to live a full and healthy life. And because of our current understanding of these concepts, what was once known as simply women's health has now expanded beyond the male-female gender binary by opening the door for anyone who needs this type of health care. As we become progressive, accepting, and inclusive, what sometimes happens is some patients end up falling through the cracks, says Dr. Ferrando. To categorize women's health as just one thing, I think, really excludes so much of the population that would and should be seeking the type of care that has gone under that umbrella previously. Well, that means now women's health applies to everyone who needs it, regardless of gender identity. If you were assigned female at birth and identify as female, women's health is for you. If you were assigned female at birth and identify as another gender, women's health is also for you. But women's health is also for people who were assigned male at birth and identify as female, non-binary, or some other gender, regardless of whether or not they've had gender-affirming care. There are certainly individuals who identify as women who are biologically male and need care, notes Dr. Ferrando, and there are certainly individuals who exist on the trans-masculine or trans-feminine side of the spectrum of gender identity who need the same level of care.
This is a science, fact-based organization who would mock a Christian for believing in miracles that we're told are true that happen in the Bible. But since science, so-called, says that you can be whatever your heart desires, then that must be true. But to actually transition a gender would be and would require a true miracle, as you would have to change everything about you down to the genetic level. It's not just name or appearance or anatomy through the mutilation of the body, or as they called it, gender-affirming care, which isn't care at all. It's quite simply butchery of the human body by unscientific, degenerate humans who are no better than the Nazi doctors of 85 years ago. Put simply, transgender doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a transgender person because it's scientifically, anatomically, biologically, and logically impossible to transition from one gender to the other. What Will Ferrell doesn't understand is that none of us, Christian or otherwise, are against people being happy. We're not hateful of the person, although to be honest, there's a righteous hatred of people trying to destroy kids or other adults through this perversion. We simply hate what this is truly doing to people in general, kids specifically. We hate the fact that we've taken severe mental and spiritual sickness and normalized it, which leads to people becoming even more lost, more confused, more deceived. Put simply, we hate that humans, image bearers of God, are being manipulated and deluded into thinking that absolute evil is normal. Our goal shouldn't be appeasement. It shouldn't be affirmation. It shouldn't be someone's happiness. To say that those are what's important is absolute hatred and evil perpetrated by people claiming to be loving and accepting. Will Ferrell says that transphobia stems from ignorance, but I ask, who is actually the ignorant one here? Is it those of us who believe that all humans were created by God, that they were all knitted together by God in the womb, that God has known us from before time, that God created all of the possible genders and gender combinations at the very beginning, male and also female? Is it those of us who believe in science, that maleness and femaleness literally is encoded in our genes? Are those of us who believe that if the mind is telling you something that's not true, ignorant if we say it's not true? If our 8-year-old comes to us and tells us that he or she is a car and wants to go running down the middle of the highway, do we just say, well, that's fine. He or she must be a car. Go. Drive free. We'd be hauled off to prison for child neglect or abuse. Why is this any different? Is it because humans are composed of males and females, so we believe we can just swap between the two? Why do we think it's easier for a man to become a woman than a man to become a car? Both are equally impossible. Equally impossible. If there's anything I've hoped to convey to you through the nearly 3 years of blah, blah, blahing on this podcast, is that we must live in the real world. We must look at everything we're being told to believe, weigh it against true truth, the true truth, and determine if what we're being told measures up. It seems to me, maybe it's simply because of the 24/7 news cycle, the instant and constant bombardment of information, the interconnectedness of the entire world, that we're being inundated more than ever with absolute lies and deception, and being told that it's truth, fact, and reality. Although someone's perception is their reality, I agree with that. That doesn't mean that someone's reality is real reality. Your reality can be wrong. It can be a lie. And if others affirm your reality, which is a lie, that makes them a liar also, and it makes them evil for affirming what they know to be a lie. Parents who affirm their child in believing he or she is what he or she is not are lying to their child, and they're lying to themselves, and they're evil for doing so. The Bible is the arbiter of true truth. It doesn't speak on all things, but it speaks on all subjects. Inference on specific issues coming from the truth of the Bible in almost all cases isn't difficult, and it's absolutely necessary to survive this world that's becoming more confusing by the day. Do not allow the world to squeeze you into its mold. Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to this world, but to be transformed through the renewing of our minds. This applies to definitions of words and phrases as much as it applies to anything else. Whether it's something relatively trivial like range anxiety, or something consequential like climate change, or something evil like transgender, we must not allow ourselves to just conform to what the world wants us to think, or say, or believe. Well, we're at the halfway point of our Hear Them Roar mini-series, and this is the one that started it all. This is the one that I first found as I was doing research for a different segment, and I says to myself, I says, you need to hear this. You, my faithful audience, need to hear what the world has done with various women in the Bible, trying to make them into something they weren't, so they can push a narrative and an agenda that has nothing to do with the biblical account. Did you know that there are names in the United States that have been ruled illegal to name your baby? And there are names around the world that are illegal as well. In the United States, some of the names literally ruled illegal through a court system are King, Queen, Jesus Christ, 3, that's like I, Roman numeral 3, Santa Claus, Majesty, Mystery, Nigger, Adolf Hitler, Messiah, the at symbol, the ampersand, the at symbol, the number 1069, those are all illegal. And look, I guess I get those. I really do. Some more than others probably. Not sure who sued in order to bring this to court, but I get it. Then around the world, well, some of them, you just need to hear some of these here. I'm advising a certain someone, and you know who you are, to put the milk down first, because here we go. In New Zealand, we have Chief Maximus, Sex Fruit, Tallulah Does the Hula from Hawaii, and Anal. Those are 4 different names that are all illegal. In Mexico, we have RoboCop and Circumcision. In Saudi Arabia, we only have one that's on the list of illegal names, Linda. And I'm really not sure who Linda is or what she did in Saudi Arabia, but whatever it was, she ruined it for everyone there. We have a couple in Malaysia, Snake and 007. No, not Bond or James Bond, just the number 007. Italy has a few of its own, Friday or Blue. I sense an almost hidden theme in these 2 from China. Let's see if you can spot it. Islam and Quran. In Morocco, we have Sarah, and I kind of wonder if she knows Linda. And for that matter, in Iceland, we have Harriet and Camilla. And in Portugal, we have Thor and Tom. Now, I'd really like to dig into these reasonings behind the illegality of these fairly common names like Tom. We don't have time for that, though. Then in Germany, Osama bin Laden. I guess you can understand that one. In Sweden, you have Metallica, and then the name capital BRFXXCCXXMNPCCCLLLMMNPRXVCLMNCKSSQLBB11116. You need bigger checks for sign your name there. France has Prince William and Nutella and the oh-so-popular Griezmann Mbappe. In Japan, we have Devil. And I'll be honest, out of all of these, this one really shocks me. I mean, have you seen what the Japanese consider to be normal or even acceptable in Japan? And this is what crosses the line? Okay. In the United Kingdom, we have Cyanide. Denmark doesn't like the name Monkey. Norway can't name a child Bridge. Spain has outlawed Wolf. Australia doesn't like Duke. And finally, Switzerland has outlawed Judas. So, look, names mean things, right? And in different countries, different names mean different things. Apparently, like Linda. I mean, what filth is that? But as our author, Michael Satchel, which I don't have to say anything. Mr. Satchel opens his article, I'd argue quite accurately, with, quote, "No two biblical figures are more synonymous with evil than Judas and Jezebel. For more than 2,000 years, they have evolved as such enduring symbols of male treachery and female depravity that it's highly unlikely any Christian children have ever been baptized in their names." And yeah, although Switzerland outlawed Judas, when is the last time you heard anyone with the name Judas or Jezebel? Well, this article, found on usnews.com from a series published in 2008, headline, "Jezebel was a killer and prostitute, but she had her good side." Surely, Mr. Satchel, you jest. But no, he doesn't jest, actually. No. He goes on, quote, "Across the centuries, in prose, poetry, movies, sermons, and song, this 9th century BC pagan queen of Israel has come to epitomize the wicked woman. Yet the events of her life, as told in 1st and 2nd Kings, are probably unfamiliar to all but devoted readers of the Bible." And that's probably correct. This isn't generally what you'll hear about on a Sunday morning, especially in churches these days. This isn't one of the main stories that are, most common. And this definitely isn't going to be heard by the Creasters, right? Those who attend church on Christmas and Easter only. So, as has been my custom through this series, we look at the use of Jezebel's name in the Bible. Her name appears 22 times in 19 verses. She's spoken of almost entirely in 1 Kings, handful of times in 2 Kings, and then one mention in one verse in Revelation 2. So, what does the Bible tell us about Jezebel? Well, we find out in 1 Kings 16 that Ahab became king of Israel. Now remember, this is a split kingdom at this point, split between the land of Judah and everything else under the name of Israel. At this point, Judah was at the end of the reign of their third king since Solomon, Asa. They started with 2 kings who did evil, but Asa did what was right. Now in Israel, however, Ahab was king number 7. All of them, including Ahab, did evil in the sight of Yahweh. In fact, we read, quote, "Now Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, and Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all who were before him. Now it happened, as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, as a wife, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made the Asherah. Thus Ahab did more to provoke Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him." So this is where we're introduced to Jezebel. Now we next find her name in 1 Kings 18, where we find out that she's in the process of, just slaughtering the prophets of God. Please, before you pass judgment, keep in mind, quote, "Jezebel was a killer and prostitute, but she had her good side." This is the somewhat comical story of when Elijah the prophet challenged Jezebel's 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah, to a fire from heaven off, and he let the 450 prophets of Baal build an altar, place their wood, place the slaughtered ox, then call out to their so-called God for hours, just dancing and shouting for Baal to answer them with fire on their altar. And then Elijah stepped in and, he had to have a smirk on his face at this point and said, quote, "Call out with a loud voice, for he is a god. Either he is occupied or relieving himself, or is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and needs to be awakened." So apparently not getting the joke, that's exactly what they did. They called out louder, this time with cutting themselves with swords and lances for hours upon hours until the time of the evening sacrifice. Well, that's when Elijah put a stop to the spectacle, built his altar, dug a trench around it, placed the wood in the ox, then had them pour water all over the sacrifice and the wood, soaking it thoroughly, filling the trench. And then Elijah prayed to Yahweh, who answered him with fire from heaven that consumed the sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones the altar was built with, and the dust of the ground, and all of the water. The people of Israel, who had been watching this all day long, fell on their faces, proclaiming, quote, Yahweh, he is God. Yahweh, he is God. Elijah told them to seize the prophets of Baal, which they did, and then he slaughtered them all at the brook Kishon. Well, Ahab went back to the palace and told Jezebel what all had happened and why she was 450 prophets of Baal short now. So Jezebel sends a messenger to Elijah, basically telling him that he's going to die, and she's going to do it. Elijah, and this should really help you and I here, Elijah, a prophet of God, one who just watched God do what he did, feared for his life and ran and told God to just kill him. He told God that he was the last remaining prophet, that Jezebel had killed all the rest, and she was now seeking his life. And Yahweh told him where to go and what to do because God still had stuff for him to accomplish. And he also told Elijah that he had 7,000 prophets in Israel. Elijah wasn't even close to the last. Fast forward to 1 Kings 21, we see Ahab as a weak, sulking, whiny king, and Jezebel as a cold-blooded, emotionless, conniving, lying murderer. Quote, but she had her good side. Ahab spied a vineyard next to his palace, owned by Naboth. He offered a better vineyard for it. He offered Naboth the full price for it, but he didn't want to sell it. So Ahab, as any king would do, went home, to his palace, lay down in his bed, turned toward the wall, and refused to eat. Not stated in the text, but fairly easily implied was his threatening to hold his breath until he got that vineyard. Well, Jezebel decided to fix it. Long story short, she had a couple people lie and say they heard Naboth curse God and the king. Naboth was taken out and stoned to death. Then Jezebel told Ahab that Naboth was dead, so go claim the vineyard. To which Ahab let out a large exhale. His shade turned from slightly blue back to his normal, I'd have to assume, pinkish-white skin tone like the Northern European everyone in the Bible is portrayed as for some reason, and he took possession of the vineyard. Now, somehow, Yahweh God got wind of all this. Someone snitched, and he sent Elijah to Ahab with a message. Quote, Behold, I will bring evil upon you, and will utterly sweep you away, and will cut off from Ahab every male, both bond and free in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah, because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger, and because you have made Israel sin. Of Jezebel also has Yahweh spoken, saying, The dogs will eat Jezebel in the district of Jezreel, the one belonging to Ahab, who dies in the city the dogs will eat, and the one who dies in the field the birds of the sky will eat. Now Ahab, ironically, actually humbled himself before God, and because of this small act of contrition, God said that he wouldn't do this during Ahab's life, but during his son's life. So then we jump to 2 Kings 9. A lot of action happens here. Ahab was dead by now. His son was king. The captain of the army, Jehu, was anointed king by prophet per Elisha's orders and told to wipe out Ahab's heirs and avenge Naboth. He killed the living son, the other one that had already died, who was the current king, and then he went to find Jezebel. Well, she spoke to him from a window overlooking the court, flanked by some of her officials. Jehu ordered them to throw her down if they were on his side, which apparently they were, and they did. And when she landed, just to be sure, he had his horse trample her to death to make sure she was dead. He then went in and did a little drinking, probably a little eating. It was probably just grape juice, though. Probably. And then he told his men to go get Jezebel's body and bury it. Well, when they went out to haul her away, they found only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had eaten the rest, just as was prophesied. But that's not quite the end. Remember, the title of this article said she was a killer and a prostitute, so where does the prostitute come in? Well, that's really mostly our final reference, found in Revelation 2, Jesus' letter to the church at Thyatira. He first compliments their love and faith, service, perseverance, but he had one thing against them. Quote, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and deceives my slaves so that they commit sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. And I gave her time to repent, and she does not wish to repent of her sexual immorality. Behold, I will throw her on a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of her deeds. and I will kill her children with pestilence, and all the churches will know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts, and I will give to each one of you according to your deeds." Now there are some who believe that this is a reincarnated Jezebel, or someone indwelt with the spirit of Jezebel herself, thus the Jezebel spirit that we spoke of a few episodes back. But the most likely scenario is that this was a woman who was evil and promoting evil, unchecked, in this otherwise thriving church. It's quite likely that her name wasn't even Jezebel, who would name their daughter that with a record of that name in the past? This was a woman in the church, actively promoting evil, just as the real Jezebel had done so many years prior. And that is Jezebel. Quite a bit more of a prominent character than the others we've discussed thus far. A name that isn't even illegal, apparently, because nobody anywhere is going to name their child Jezebel. But now we need to jump into this article and discover why this author, Mr. Satchel, would say, quote, "But she has her good side." Because from everything we know of her, that's not a side that she had. Now, Satchel starts by saying, quote, "With its intrigue, sex, cruelty, and murder, Jezebel's story is a rich stew of the historical events, allegorical interpretation, and metaphorical license that make many of the Old Testament's biographical dramas such fascinating reading." Well, I almost get the impression that our author doesn't believe the Bible to be exactly true. That could present a problem. He explains that in her struggle to bring pagan worship to Israel, quote, "where the Hebrew God, Yahweh, is the only deity," she pays a terrible price and gets thrown out of the window and eaten by dogs. He goes on, quote, "To modern feminist authors, Jezebel is one of the most intriguing women in the scriptures, a blood-stained yet strong-willed, politically astute, and courageous woman. A Phoenician princess who worships Baal, the pagan god of fertility, Jezebel marries King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel. She persuades him to tolerate her alien faith, then becomes entwined with the vicious religious conflict that ends in her death." Okay, look, he's probably right. Modern feminist authors probably do see her as more of a misunderstood, a hero-type figure, which, look, I read and summarized her entire story for us, and is that what you got from the Bible? That she was politically astute and courageous? That she simply became entwined in some religious conflict? Janet Howe Gaines, let me quote this, quote, "biblical scholar," at the University of New Mexico, has some thoughts. Quote, "She became a convenient scapegoat for misogynistic biblical writers who tagged her as the primary force behind Israel's apostasy. She had been denounced as a murderer, prostitute, and enemy of God, yet there is much to admire in this ancient queen." So let me just do a little double checking on something here. Yes, biblical scholar. That's what they wrote here. Interesting. Now, look, I know those two words. I know them in that order, and I know that order means something. So either she's wrong about what that means, or I am, or we both are, but we both can't be right about our definitions of biblical scholar. Now, Sir Satchel goes on with a rather dramatized telling of Jezebel's influence on Ahab upon their marriage, her influence on religious practices, her hatred for the Hebrew God, and general influence on Israel, but he's not generally wrong in his facts, so we'll let that go. And then in what appears to be his preferred literary flair, he says, quote, "To Jews, Baal worship was the worst sin against God, akin to today's Christians embracing Satan. Some interpreters see Jezebel as commendably faithful to her pagan religion, but the King's writers portray her as a dangerous apostate." Okay, look, commendably faithful to her pagan religion. Yeah, okay, I guess from the Baal worshiper standpoint, sure, she was commendable. She stuck with it, but to be honest, it's not like Israel was overly worried about correct worship at this specific time. Since the split of the kingdom with Solomon's sons, Israel had nothing but kings who led them in evil disobedience to their God. Now, as for the writers of 1st and 2nd Kings portraying her as an apostate, no. An apostate is one who turns his or her back on his or her religion, as the case may be, and she was not a Jew. She never once worshipped Yahweh, So she couldn't have turned her back on God. She worshipped her pagan gods, specifically Baal, and she never wavered from doing that, it doesn't appear. So she was not an apostate, and neither of the books of the Kings portrayed her as such. But he goes on to summarize the contest between Elijah and the 450 prophets as to whose God would send fire, and the humiliation of the prophets of Baal, the Elijah's sacrifice, altar, and surroundings being consumed, and then Elijah slaughtering the prophets and Jezebel threatening Elijah. Goes on to give a mostly accurate but brief summary of the account of Naboth's vineyard, the promise of God through Elijah to avenge Naboth's murder on Ahab and Jezebel, and then the carrying out of that sentence of justice. Yes, she, quote, calmly and courageously prepares herself, paints her eyes with kohl, that's Kohl, dresses her hair. And then Jehu enters, commands her eunuchs to throw her down, quote, and in graphic detail, the Old Testament authors described the end. Now Jehu, on his horse, trampled her. Then he went in to eat and drink, quote, sated. He gives the order to bury her, but it was too late. Yahweh's prophecy had been fulfilled. And Captain Satchel lists some of the other, quote, biblical bad girls, and then asks, referring to Jezebel, quote, but how much is true? And before he even gives us a chance to answer, which, why ask if you're just going to tell us right away anyway, quote, Old Testament stories originating in the mists of time may be rooted in reality, but they evolved into metaphor and parable with each retelling. Well, at least it's good to know that the Bible, or at least the Old Testament, isn't really true. It might be true-ish. Yeah, sure, but it's not true. Back to our biblical scholar, quote, Gaines believes the motives of 1st and 2nd Kings writers, as with all Old and New Testament authors, must be evaluated when considering the veracity of their accounts. The pagan Jezebel, she notes, is crowned Queen of Israel at a time of spreading Hebrew apostasy. She conveniently provided an opportunity to teach a moral lesson on the evils of spurning monotheism and worshiping multiple idols, and the writers exaggerate her transgressions accordingly. Despite the harlot references, there is no scriptural evidence that Jezebel was a prostitute or an unfaithful wife, yet the taint of immorality has branded her a whore for more than 2,000 years. One explanation is biblical allegory. The Old Testament authors often equated worship of false gods and foreign deities with wanton sexuality. So look, it's all just a story to make a point. Phew! I was afraid that some of this craziness was real. At least now I know I can dismiss the Old Testament as simply stories, and as such I can also dismiss the New Testament as the New references the Old just all of the time, implying that it's true. So Jesus and the apostles and the other New Testament writers, apparently since they didn't know this stuff was just stories, we don't really need to take much from them either, right? Biblical scholar lady who is or was teaching young adults, biblical stuff, claiming to have the inside scoop, says, quote, every biblical word condemns her. Jezebel is an outspoken woman in a time when females have little status and few rights, a foreigner in a xenophobic land, an idol worshiper in a place with a Yahweh-based, state-sponsored religion, a murderer and a meddler in political affairs in a nation of strong patriarchs, a traitor in a country where no ruler is above the law, and a whore in the territory where the 10 Commandments originate. Why, when it's put that way, poor Jezebel barely had a chance in this life, did she? She's a strong woman in a misogynistic patriarchy, an undocumented resident trying to make her way in a scary foreign land, and someone who wanted to simply worship how she'd like, live her best life now, and have some sort of autonomous control over her own body, thank you very much, in a Jewish nationalist theocracy, just heck-bent on keeping women from having any rights at all. Jezebel is literally the victim here. Poor gal. Quote, This biblical character assassination, if that's what it is, succeeded only too well. Jezebel reappears as a New Testament prophet in Revelation 2:20, encouraging servants to fornicate and eat the animals that have been sacrificed to the gods. She has come down through the ages as the primary symbol of wanton, shameless womanhood. She has been limited, L-I-M-N-E-D, limited by playwright William Shakespeare and poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, I'm not a poetry guy, by 16th century religious reformer John Knox and novelist James Joyce. Frankie Lane had an international hit single, Jezebel, in the 1950s, and Boyz II Men sing about her today. In 1938, Bette Davis won an Academy Award for Best Actress playing the title role in the steamy melodrama Jezebel, set in the 1850s. Jezebel characters have appeared in such television shows as I Love Lucy, Little House on the Prairie, and The Muppet Show, and her name was invoked during the investigation into President Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. From Lady Macbeth to Lizzie Borden, among history's most famous female villains, fictional or real, the pagan queen of Kings 1 and 2 still rules as the most wicked and enduring of them all. And that, my friends, is another take on Jezebel. A misunderstood, enduring, powerful woman with an almost cherub-like demeanor who, yes, was a murderer and an evil woman, but who can blame her, right? She was a champion of women's rights in an era of men, much like the feminists of our current day. She was breaking those glass ceilings. That's all I'm trying to say here. The good thing is, it was all just a dream, or at least a bedtime story. See, the authors were really just trying to make a point. Women are to keep in line, do as they're told. Shh, sweetie, the men are talking. That's what we should get from the fairy tale of Jezebel. Or maybe this. Maybe this, and I know this is crazy, and maybe this is a historic chronicle of the age of the kings of Israel. Maybe God's chosen people turned from him over and over and followed false gods, worshiping lifeless idols, committing ever-worsening atrocities. Maybe, and I mean, just hear me out here, maybe this entire historical account, in addition to being a historical account, is leading us somewhere. It's showing a progression. If only we could decipher where all of this lostness, brokenness, evil, sinfulness was taking us. It's almost like man is a lost sinner from birth, like man's heart left to his own devices is a wicked, evil place, desperately in need of someone to bring a way of salvation from the muck and mire we find ourselves in. But no, this is simply an allegory, very detailed allegory, to teach a moral lesson to all who hear it. Something to scare the kiddos into following that monotheistic God, and if we need a little embellishment here or there, or a lot, in order to keep the kids in line, well, I mean, so be it. It's not like this silly, grim-like fairy tale will ever find its way into a book. And even if it did, it's not like that book would ever really catch on. And even if it did, it's not like anyone would take it seriously, like it came from God himself or anything. Sheesh. That makes much better sense than believing that the Old Testament is true, of course, despite it being verified over and over through archaeology and historical writings, and being spoken of as true, literal history in the New Testament by people who were absolutely real also, or like it was inspired by the Holy Spirit or anything like that. It's just a story. It's amazing the lengths the world will go to in order to elevate evil to good and to condemn good as evil. Anywhere the unsaved masses who literally hate the Bible can twist and use the Bible, turning it into nothing but a story that man would prefer be told, well, they do it. This is one of the reasons in my engineering brain that the Bible actually makes sense. The Bible is so illogical, it has no option but to be true. What our author and biblical scholars, so-called, have stated in their interpretation is exactly what man, unsaved, lost, sinful man, would write, and the moral, so-called, lesson they'd have for us to learn from this well-woven tale. But what man definitely wouldn't do in a made-up story is tell the story of Israel and the chosen people like this, turning their back on their Creator, their Lord, and the entirety of the nation following evil. Now, they would not tell a story like this. Man wants to redeem people like Jezebel, to show her as someone not so much evil, but bullied and misunderstood and scared and lonely, but strong and smart. Now, that's a story that teaches a lesson. And today, if we can throw in some patriarchy and misogyny, some xenophobia, some oppression and intolerance of a woman, likely of color, well, even better. But alas, the story of Jezebel is actually real. This was an actual evil woman, queen, wife of King Ahab, yet another in a long line of evil kings of Israel, both before and after him, until, of course, God had had enough of them, used the Assyrians and their hatred of the Jews to conquer them and take them into captivity. Jezebel is not a redeemable character because she was very real and very evil, and she died lost in her sins, unrepentant, and she is now in hell or Sheol, whatever you want to call it. She's in eternal torment right now, awaiting the final judgment at the end of the age. If there's any lesson we should really learn from Jezebel, it's that we shouldn't wait before turning to Christ in faith and belief and repenting of our sinful hearts. Desiring now to walk with Christ, to serve the one true God. That's what we should be doing right now. You may not be thrown from a window, trampled by horses and eaten by dogs, but you might. Or you might have an accident, or the old ticker may give out before you were ready, or so many other things that could happen in a fraction of a second. And Jezebel's only interest in the Israelite God was to mock him and destroy his appointed and anointed prophets. She had no desire to know him, to come to him, to worship him, and now she's dead. Don't be like Jezebel. Despite that nasty rumor floating around, she absolutely, definitely did not have her good side. Okay, look, you're never going to believe this, but here comes a goal update. Yeah, this is number 8 in my 2024 goals run, and yes, this is month number 9, but we skipped last month because of a trip going up to see family, which incidentally went really well, except for a few days of back muscle strain. But thankfully that worked itself out faster than has been typical for me in the past. And also thankfully that chronic back issue that apparently I deal with doesn't flare up anywhere near as much as it used to. Those are both good things. Anyway, it was a good trip. That's why we're down one goal update as compared to months. So look, the goals suffered fairly substantially during that week. They were kind of on life support prior to that, but since then, for the month of September, I've tried to renew my focus and do something to at least make these goals respectable by the end of the year. And with that, let's go ahead and see where I am, basically at 3/4 of the year completed. Starting with the dreaded tonnage check-in. What is my mass doing now? Okay, so look, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I've finally gotten back to tracking calories, tracking calorie burn, and working out. As I've said before, as I've told others, the reality for me, and I would suspect for many others, the process of tracking and working out won't happen until you kind of hit your limit, which is different for everyone. So whatever my limit is in my psyche, I think I pretty much hit that and decided, I really need to do something about whatever this mess is that I'm carrying around on my skeletal frame. So I'm kind of trying to let my weight stabilize. I think it's maybe close. I don't know. Time will tell. Tracking calories burned, which I calculate using net calories eaten for the week and weight gained or lost for the week. And then, of course, the standard 3,500 calories per pound, plus or minus. Well, it shows some silliness. As in 3 weeks ago, my average daily burn rate was over 4,100 calories, which is not close to realistic. 2 weeks ago, it was 539 calories per day, which is not realistic. And last week was 3,273 calories per day, which is not realistic. But discounting 3 weeks ago for justifiable reasons, averaging just the last 2 weeks, it gives a daily burn rate of right at 1,900 calories per day, which is very realistic. So like I said, there's some silliness and some stabilization, and I don't know, we'll see. That said, my weight as of Saturday, if it is to be believed, was 202.2 pounds. Now, that's not remotely close to where I'd like it to be, but it is 7.6 pounds less than where I started at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, look, just a shade under a pound a month. I don't know what else you want from me. Seriously, though, at least it's something, and I'm working on making it, more something. As for fat and muscle, which were the other stats I was tracking, as of Saturday, I was at 18.4% fat. Stop the laughing, which is down from 19.3 at the beginning of the year, and I'm 52.7% muscle, so you should be afraid of me, which is up from 52.1% at the beginning of the year. So look, like I said, not where I want to be, but if I don't do what I need to do, I'm not going to just magically get where I want to be. And I'm well aware of this. Thank you. Here's what I don't get. My magical scale, in conjunction with my phone app, it gathers all sorts of data, somehow through the bottoms of my feet. And out of all the data that it gathers, the couple of the stats that it doesn't seem to like are my weight and BMI, which, to be honest, it'll never be happy with my BMI. I simply can't/won't meet the accepted BMI target. And it doesn't like my visceral fat, which is basically gut fat. Look, I don't like it either. That's at a 12 unit measure. I don't know what that means. Apparently 12 is high. It wants me to be at an 11 or below. 6 to 11 is acceptable. 0 to 6 is good. I'll never be at a 0 to 6. I'll just be honest, but I can get into the 6 to 11 range. Other than that, at what should be about 38 pounds heavier than the very top of my acceptable BMI range, this app shows my body fat to be on the good end of acceptable, heading toward fitness, my skeletal muscle to be just low of the midpoint of normal, my subcutaneous fat, or that's fat stored in the skin, to be on the high side of normal. I apparently have fatty skin, which if I've learned anything from turkeys, that means I would be absolutely delicious were I to be roasted and salted to taste. And everything else, fat-free, body weight, bone mass, protein, etc., all of those things are good. Basically, my only real issue per my magical scale is that I've got too much gut fat. And not by a whole lot, which just supports the idea that BMI is not a good indicator for everyone. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Moving to reading, I've had 3 of 4 weeks in September that were pretty decent. 1 week was pretty bad. 1 week was pretty good. The bad week was due to work, audits, etc. It did not allow me to do much reading during lunch. That said, I'm currently at 3,464 pages read so far for this year, which puts me at 77% of my goal of 4,500 for the year. So if we say I'm at 75% of the year complete, I'm just slightly ahead of pace in order to meet my goal. Now, I know that the last week, at least, of the year is going to get a little crazy, so I need to work on getting that goal knocked out sooner rather than letting it pile up to the end of the year, or I won't make it. Days in the Bible is next, so I had a few down weeks, but as of last week, I'm sitting at 99.7% of my goal pace of 5 days per week. So look, I'm right there. With the restarting of Sunday school after the summer break, that will mostly knock out one possible day of Bible study right there as I do my reading in the morning, and frankly, I typically won't have time on Sunday mornings. Now, could I do some Bible study on Sundays, either morning or afternoon, evening? Yes, I could. But again, this is why I have a realistic target in my goals, because if I'm being honest, I probably won't. I kind of consider going to church, following along, taking notes to be Bible study in itself, although I don't take credit for it in these goals. As for my larger goal of working through the Bible in 2 years, I'm slightly behind my initial calculated pace by about 30 chapters total, some of which are very short psalms, but still on pace to finish by the end of next year. I'm moving to Duolingo. Okay, here we go. So the reality is I'm burnt out on Greek. It's hard. It's for a variety of reasons. Harder, I'd maintain, than other languages, in large part because the letters are different. So although I've kept my streak going, which now sits at 288 days, and my total time spent learning is sitting at 141.6% of my goal of 70 minutes per week, the last couple months have been a real slog. It's gotten boring. I've been kind of, phoning it in rather than actually trying to learn, and the number of minutes in Duolingo show it, so I made an executive decision. Years ago, I had started trying to learn Italian until I just got tired of playing with Duolingo. I wasn't really burnt out of Italian, I just got tired of it. I don't think I was even remotely close to 288 days at that point, but I gave up. So I've decided to jump back over to Italian and see what I could remember there. And shockingly, I've actually remembered quite a bit. So I'm going to work on that track for a while, and we'll see where we get on that. All right, finally, prayer. Well, a number of weeks of fairly poor prayer time. Just being honest, some of that is explainable. sort of. I mean, it's justifiable or what okay, I know. No excuses, right? But it is. It's kind of explainable. Some of it is quite simply failure on my part for whatever reason. I'd guess that for many of us, prayer life can go in cycles and seasons. I know that some of you are prayer warriors, and look, I commend you for that. I'm still in training, as it were. So that said, I'm currently sitting at 81.7% of my goal pace for the year, which was the same as Bible reading 5 days a week. So that translates really to about 4 days per week on my knees at the end of the day to focus on prayer, reading a psalm, working through my prayer list. Now, that's not where I wanted to be, but in all honesty, that's probably the most consistent I've ever been, at least for this length of time. I don't know that for sure since I've never tracked it before, but that's kind of what I feel to be true. And with that, that's my update. If I were to give my goals a green or red color, I'd say I've got 3 greens, 2 reds. Both of those reds, pretty red. But I think I can bring them to more respectable reds by the end of the year. I don't think I'm going to turn them green, but I think I can get them more close to green. As always, it's a matter of focus and discipline, and I wish I had either one of those. Okay, back to you. How are you doing on your goals, if you have any goals for the year? We're at 75% of the year, which seems impossible, to be honest, but here we are. So are you on track? Are you exceeding expectations? Are you totally collapsing? I've been in all of those places. Wherever you are, let me encourage you to keep at it. Refocus, keep pushing. And at this point, you're also going to want to start thinking of next year's goals. Look at what you'd like to track next year based on what you are or aren't tracking this year, or what you feel is in or out of control this year, where you've succeeded or failed in this year's goals, etc. By the end of November, just a couple months away, you really want to have a good idea as to what you'd like to track for 2025. So, as always, if you have any questions or comments, ideas, tips, or tricks, or whatever, let me know. Contact info in the episode notes, as always. Keep on pushing. Okay, bye. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.